The internet. It's such a huge part of our lives today. But have you ever thought of how the internet actually comes to our homes? We usually know quite a few of these techniques just, off the top of our head, right? Things like dial-up, things like fiber, for example. But, well, today let's delve a bit deeper into exactly how they work. And with that, hopefully we can get a better understanding of how, this very precious resource comes to us. You're watching another Random Wednesday episode on 0612 TV. Hello and welcome back to another Random Wednesday episode. Today, we're going to take a look at 4 different ways in which internet comes to us. It's so interesting to see how many of these methods actually just right on top of existing infrastructure. And because of this, it can be a little bit unwieldy, it can affect performance, but it's still ingenious because you don't have to actually run additional cabling. Let's take a look at each, starting from the oldest of the lot, dial-up. You know dial-up, your modem basically calls a number and it makes that very distinctive sound because, you're basically listening to that call getting started. Let's take a closer look at what exactly is going on. Essentially, here's how dial-up begins. You have a phone line connected to a phone service provider, so why not use that to give you internet access? All you have to do is to hook up the same phone line to a modem and in turn connect that to your computer, and that will allow your computer to go online. And you can achieve that by using the infrastructure you already have in your home that powers your home phone. So here's how all this works. The magic really happens in your modem, which stands for a modulator-demodulator. The idea is you have data and it modulates or basically expresses them as sound for it to be transferable over the wire. Essentially, it uses your phone line unmodified. Of course, doing things this way means that there are significant challenges to getting this to work properly. For one, your phone line is actually very limited in terms of what it can represent. The voice band actually carries a very small frequency range, 300 Hz to 3.4 kHz. And even though this was designed to carry the human voice, it's actually only carrying what you can think of as the most important subset of frequencies. This of course was designed as a measure to, limit the bandwidth, but of course, since it is set up this way, it actually limits the tones your modem can use to represent data. Not only that, to make things worse, if there was noise or any form of disruptions on the line, that's going to directly affect your data. It could corrupt, data that is already traveling on the line, or it could cause the connection to drop altogether. And in fact, because of all these limitations, dial-up is slow. We generally know of dial-up as 56K, 56 kilobits per second. It could be less, it is usually less because that is its peak performance. However, the upper end of dial-up transfer speeds have actually been pushed using many different methods. The first and probably most straightforward of the lot is to of course represent your data better. Since dial-up involves basically playing sounds over time to represent data, if you can sort of tweak up and streamline the representation of data per unit time, you can carry much more. On top of that, you could use techniques such as bonding. Since one call essentially is only going to carry a fixed amount of data, why not make 2 calls, 3 calls? You get the idea? The more calls you make, the more data you could transfer at once. Obviously, to do that, you would need multiple phone lines. You would also need some strategy of splitting and combining packets that were received between these lines to basically get a single contiguous stream. So of course, while bonding is an extremely smart idea, it is limited in terms of when and where it can be used. Finally, another strategy is to compress data. If you can represent data in fewer bits, you will end up being able to transfer more useful information per unit time. And that's why compression can really help boost the speeds of dial-up. Now, while we say dial-up is really smart because it uses essentially an audio stream to represent data, it is by no means the only thing that does that. Fax machines, for one, do the same. Of course, at least for early fax machines, you'll find that they do a lot less in comparison to a modem, because a modem has to basically take digital data and represent it as sound, an analog medium. Early fax machines could express the image, that is supposed to be transferring, in an analog form, the same way VHS tapes actually worked. And there you go, that was dial-up in a nutshell, and I think it is, the childhood or early teenage years of a lot of us, right? Well, of course, depending on how old you are. But yeah, that was a good part of our history. Let's now move on to its more powerful cousin, ADSL, or Asymmetrical Digital Subscriber Line. Now, this one is interesting because again, just like dial-up, it rides on our existing infrastructure. That is, of course, our phone lines. ADSL, which is what we get in homes, is actually one specific type of DSL technology, also known as Digital Subscriber Line. And we'll talk about DSL in general. ADSL, of course, uses the same principle. Again, DSL rides on your phone line, but unlike dial-up, it does not ride in the voice band, which of course has a very limited frequency. Your phone line is actually more than capable of representing frequencies that are much higher, that are far beyond what we can hear. And that is what DSL takes advantage of. It represents its data as high frequencies on your phone line, and as a result, it not only frees up your voice band, it also allows it to carry a lot more information. Of course, in order to do this, the setup is far more complex. Here's what it looks like. Essentially, you have a phone service provider as usual that is of course, connected to your phone line. But on top of that, internet service providers also need to set up what is known as a DSLAM, which then connects the phone line, through a bunch of stuff to the internet. A filter is actually introduced so that these two signals can come together and mingle on the same line without affecting each other. This will also serve to split off incoming information to the correct place. If it is, voice for a phone call, it gets split off to the phone side of things. And if it represents data, internet traffic, it goes the right way. The setup in your house is more or less similar. Basically, you will need your phone line again. You will need a modem to correctly extract the data and to inject more data into the system. But you will also need to install a filter. In this case, this is known as a micro filter. And again, the whole idea is we don't want signals, from our modem, from our internet surfing, to mix with the signals from our actual phone. A micro filter is an extremely important component to have. If you don't have this, you may find that your internet connection, either never gets established in the first place or drops constantly, thanks to activity on your phone line. So yeah, it's important to have that there. So comparing the differences and similarities between DSL and dial-up, for one, DSL is much faster. Thanks to the fact that it uses bandwidth that is outside of the voice band, it can represent a lot more data. And not only that, it allows the phone to be used at the same time. And again, for the same reason, it is no longer using the voice band. When it comes to dial-up, usually what happens is, your internet service provider may disconnect your call after you've been connected for a very long time. So dial-up is really something you want to connect to when you need the service, and when you're done, it needs to be cut off. This is especially a concern because, it's essentially making a phone call. And yeah, the minutes add up. DSL, on the other hand, is something that is designed to be connected in the long term. Barring the occasional issue that requires a modem restart, essentially you can be just permanently connected. Of course, one minor advantage of dial-up is that it can run without any modification at all to your existing infrastructure. DSL is just one tiny step behind because you will need to install microfilters for everything to work correctly. So up to this point, we've taken a look at two techniques that make use of the existing phone infrastructure. Let's now move on to look at cable, which again uses a different kind of infrastructure, and that is your cable TV, essentially. So let us now move on to cable internet. For the first time in this discussion, we are no longer involving the phone line. Your phone service provider connects to your phone and it has nothing to do with internet at all. Instead, the key players in this now is your cable service provider, who provide you access to cable TV via a set-top box. This usually comes to your home via coaxial cable. Since this is a brand new dedicated cable, your cable service provider could technically add any service to it. Of course, in this case, we're talking about internet. Nothing is stopping them from providing internet access via the same cable, broken out via the same set-top box. It goes straight to your computer, and yeah, voila, you're connected to the internet. Of course, again, nothing stopping them from providing, say, home phone service if that's what they want. Your cable service provider can basically add anything they like to it. Of course, coming back to the main part of this discussion, they could provide internet, and very fast internet at that. There are some caveats to this setup, however, and that usually involves congestion. You see, this is generally how a cable service provider would provide internet to many homes. Essentially, they have one big trunk that splinters off, that everyone actually shares. This is all well and good if everyone is nice and, well, doesn't really hog their connection, but all it takes is one person to suck up a lot of bandwidth, and this is going to cause slowness for everyone sharing the same big trunk. Again, because this is a shared service, congestion becomes a problem real quick. Compare this to DSL. Now, for the case of DSL, every single person has a phone line going to their home, which is directly connected to the equipment. What this means is, technically speaking, whatever your neighbor is doing will not affect you at all. They have their own dedicated cable that is not going to interfere with yours. Of course, that's not to say that you have a direct connection to the internet or a direct connection to whatever website you're connecting to. No matter what service you use, ultimately, something will collect all the traffic into a single big trunk that goes to the internet. Again, this remains the case no matter what kind of technology you use. But of course, the issue here is whether there is congestion in what is known as the last mile. Usually, this amount of cable is known as the last mile. And yeah, in the case of cable, because you are sharing that trunk across the last mile, interactions between different homes is going to happen, whereas it is far less likely in the case of DSL. So comparing these two technologies again, DSL has this slight upper hand in the sense that firstly, it uses an existing infrastructure, assuming that your home has phone to it, which is definitely hugely more likely in comparison to having cable. So if you want cable internet or cable TV for that matter, the cable needs to be run into your home. In addition, DSL is less affected by last mile congestion, while cable is. This is of course by design, by how the cable was actually set up. Having said that, because DSL taps into existing infrastructure, it has its limitations. Earlier versions of ADSL have a maximum speed limit of approximately 8 megabits per second, whereas newer versions can go up to 24 megabits per second. Cable, on the other hand, because it is, well, a dedicated cable that is specially run for this purpose, it can carry higher speeds, usually averaging around 50 megabits per second, but it can go up to hundreds of megabits. And there you go, that's another way around the problem, right? Again, we're riding on existing infrastructure, but because now cable is actually run by the company is able to sort of tweak it up and ensure that it meets their specifications. Let's now move on to the newest and latest of the lot, which is fiber. Let's take a look at what exactly fiber is doing and why it confers so many advantages. Optical fiber is the first in many senses of the term. I mean, for all the technologies we've seen so far, we are almost always using copper wire. We're using electrical signals in a wire to represent information. Fiber, on the other hand, modulates information in beams of light, carried in strands of glass basically, which is what we call optical fiber. When it comes to fiber, a dedicated line must be run to your home. You fairly certainly do not already have fiber just run sitting there waiting for you, and in other words, if you wanted fiber, well, they've got to run it. Since fiber is essentially light going through a glass tube, you're gonna need some sort of equipment to turn that into, well, electrical signals, what your devices can understand. That's what your optical network terminal, or ONT, actually does. It translates those light signals into electrical signals, in which then you can plug your router or your devices into. Interestingly, fiber shares one similar thing to cable, and that is, again, because this is a dedicated connection, it can basically carry anything, not just internet. It can power your phone for use in, say, voice over IP kind of situations. It can carry TV channels and on-demand TV. And thanks to the fact that fiber is blazing fast, when it comes to things like TV, it allows you to stream things quickly and efficiently, and at high quality. So yeah, fiber is great, but of course, there are its fair share of disadvantages. Now, when you're using, say, Ethernet coming out of an ADSL connection, do whatever you want with the cable, right? Coil it up, chuck it in a corner, let it collect dust, and, well, you're gonna have to clean it up, but it's not a huge problem. However, when it comes to fiber, because it works on optics, you're gonna have to be extremely careful with the cable. You don't want to bend it at a very sharp angle because that's going to damage the fiber and basically stop it from working. You don't want to rest anything heavy on it. You've just got to be careful because now it's not carrying a current, it's carrying light. And, well, obviously anything that obstructs or interferes with the light path is going to create problems. So while fiber is great, it has its disadvantages as well. You're gonna have to run extra cabling, you're gonna have to be very careful with the fiber itself. So yeah, that is, well, a trade-off, I suppose. Of course, for the blazing fast speeds that fiber provides, I'm more than happy to have to deal with that. So here's a summary of, well, all the 4 technologies we've looked at today. We are mostly focusing on, what infrastructure this actually rides on. And you'll find that, yeah, things are best for dial-up in the sense that, well, it just uses what you already have, which is your phone line. Unfortunately, doing that makes things a little slow. When it comes to DSL, you're still using your phone line, just a different part of it. That allows it to carry, well, a bit more information at the cost of simply installing a micro filter. An additional advantage is that it's not going to disrupt your existing phone line. When it comes to cable, well, of course, said cable has to be run, but barring this minor inconvenience, you will be getting, well, potentially tens to hundreds of megabits per second of internet speed, which is great. Of course, there are congestion issues to worry about as well when it comes to cable. Fiber is the fastest of the lot, offering up to gigabit speeds. Like cable, it can provide other services, but it does require you to, well, basically make a brand new fiber installation. These are essentially 4 fairly common ways of getting internet in your home, compared side by side. Anyway, that's all there is for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you have a better insight of how internet comes to you. But yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, you're watching 0612 TV with NERDfirst.net. Thank you very much for watching. If you like my work and are feeling generous, you can shoot me a one-time donation on PayPal or sign up for a recurring one on Patreon. Of course, you can simply like, comment, and subscribe. You know the deal. For more videos, links to my channel and a related playlist are on screen. Thank you for your support.